Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, coming to you live from the outskirts of Atlanta, GA, for another episode of Live Well Sisters. So come on in the room as we get ready to dive into a really wonderful and powerful conversation that I know is going to have meaning for each and every one of you. So if this is your first time joining us here in this space, welcome. First of all, welcome. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have you here to be able to dive into some of the things that really help us to learn how to live well and to live our best lives. So we've been in this space for coming up on 4 years now, and it's just really been truly an honor to be able to bring wonderful experts and just, beautiful, bold, brilliant, and beautiful Black women to us to share parts of their stories and to encourage us in a multitude of ways. And tonight is no different. So actually, we are going to be getting a sneak peek of a book that is coming out next month called Does God See Me? So you all are getting a sneak peek, and I would encourage you to go ahead and just get ready to add this to your cart. Get ready to share this with your friends and family because it's a powerful book that's really going to help us all. So our guest and author is Dieula Previlon, who is the founder and executive director of Elevate Her International Ministries, with a vision to empower women to heal from trauma and thrive. She is a counselor in private practice and an ordained minister. Her professional career in counseling, coaching, pastoring, and international ministry spans over 20 years. Originally from Haiti, she is the fourth daughter in a family of 8, so she's got a big family. Her career in ministry today are because her parents sacrificed immensely for the sake of their family, entering an immigration process to the United States that spanned many hardships over several years. She is the mother of 3 adult sons and lives in New Jersey with her husband. Without further delay, let's welcome Dieula to Live Well, Sister. Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I want to fangirl and do all this.
Yes, like, hey girl, hey. We already had a moment behind the scenes, but yes, it's
Yes,
such
you
a
did.
pleasure to have you here. And I count it as an honor that you are letting us get a sneak peek of your book about 3 weeks before it actually
Yes.
out. So thank you for that.
Yes. You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Yes. So already got people in the room saying hey to you. Let's see here.
Yay.
Cynthia is here. All
Yay. Hey,
right.
guys. Hey, everyone.
Yeah, so yes, friends and family, come on in the room and please share it with others so that they can be a part of this great conversation. Well, congratulations. How does
Yes.
it feel to be just a few weeks out from the release of Does God See Me?
I've been on this journey long enough with God. And, at this point, I just have a sense of peace and a sense of calm. Just releasing it to God because it's been such a God journey already. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, you know what, God, I'll talk to the people you want me to talk. I'll be in the rooms you want me to be in, and I'll gladly show up where you want me to show up. So I do feel a sense of peace because I know, God is ahead of it. God sees me. So I'm like,
Right.
if God
Absolutely.
sees me, then I'm good.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, you are seen, you are fully seen. So
Yes.
I did not read the tagline to the book. It's Does God See Me? How God Meets Us in the Center of Our Trauma Healing Journey. And it's a
Mhm.
journey that many of us are on, whether or not we realize it or,
Right.
put it up front or not. But what
Yeah.
was it that made you decide that this was an important work for you to release out into the world?
Yeah, so the work did not start out being what it is today. So I started out writing a Bible study.
Okay.
And I started writing the Bible study while I was doing prison ministry years ago.
Okay.
And so I spent about 2, 3 years doing prison ministry, and I was writing curriculum. And I'm like, okay, this stuff is good. Maybe someday I'll put it in a book somewhere. And so the month of October of 2019. I have a friend, she's an editor, she wrote her own book, and I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, this blueprint to a book. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's a Bible study. Can you help me?" And she said, "Yes, I can help you." And then in November, my cousin died, and my brother was at the funeral, and my brother, did all the stuff. And then in December, like December 8th or something like that, I resigned from my church job. Then the day after I resigned, my nephew passed.
Mm,
While we were in the funeral of my nephew, my brother passed.
mm,
And
mm,
so all this stuff started happening. I didn't really think this book was going to be possible. But this book helped me through that season of my trauma healing journey. And so this book morphed into what it is today because of what happened in 2019 as I started really seriously writing this book. So it's a personal project because it helped me. And so
mm,
I'm like, I don't care if it doesn't help the rest of y'all, but this book has helped me, and
mm.
that's enough.
Right. And, in full disclosure, I already told Jerla this, but as I was reading, there were points in the book where, I had tears in my eyes, and it's helping me. It has helped me
That's good.
in reading. And it's one of those things that I really will go back because, I have to read for preparation. But,
Yeah.
whenever you are truly on a healing journey, it doesn't happen. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I know I'm going to have to go back and dive
Yes.
into some of the concepts and, really answer some of the questions that you propose and do the journaling and the exercises,
Yes.
all of
Yes.
these great things, just so I can really, feel the full impact of it, and of course,
Yes.
prayers, of
Yes.
course, because we're talking about God. So there's prayers in here as well.
Exactly, exactly. And it's a journey. It's a journey. And I tell people it's not when you're healing, you don't want to rush the process because there are some things that you need to sit with. There are some things that need to marinate a little bit. There are some places you are with God that you need time.
Hmm.
And if you don't give yourself that time, you will not allow yourself to get to the next step of the journey. So give yourself time. Go back.
Absolutely. I definitely plan to do that. So, the book itself is broken down into three different parts, and, each one builds upon the other. We kind
Yes.
of start with what it means to understand our trauma stories.
Yeah.
Then, we go into facing those stories and then finding freedom from the story. And I love the way this is laid out because what's the saying? You can't conquer what you won't confront.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to start with, kind of start there,
Yeah.
realizing that some things happen, really facing it and then looking at ways to conquer it.
Yeah.
So obviously you also talk about intentionality in the book. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this was intentionally set up this way.
Yes, it was. It was. The thing about it is I like what you said about you can't heal from what you can't confront. What I do in the book intentionally is to utilize gracious language and very gentle pace and very gentle posture in the book because as a therapist and as a pastor, I'm like, people don't change by you forcing them.
Right.
And people have been so traumatized, they've been so hurt that if we're going to force and be aggressive with the process, we're just going to turn people away and shut them down. They won't come back to counseling and they won't come back to church. And
Right.
so we need to work with people with trauma informed lenses. And so
Hmm.
this book is a trauma informed book because I know what it is to not only deal with trauma, but also to work with clients who have dealt with trauma. And the posture is so important
Mm-hmm.
to handle. It's almost like there. I wish I could put a caution in the book, like handle with care.
Yes.
Because people who are going through, they need to be cared for and they need to be handled with care. And so that's what I tried to do in the book, to kind of cradle my audience and readers like a mother,
Yes.
in God's arms, where it's not too forced, it's not too harsh. It's like a gentle hug. It's a traveling companion, is what I tell people the book is.
Absolutely. And before we get a little deeper into what, some of the themes are in the sections, I do want to talk about the whole concept of you being a pastor, minister, as well as being a therapist or counselor, because oftentimes, I identify as a Christian. Just say that's
Yes,
who I
yes,
am.
yes.
But oftentimes I have found that in some church settings that you may be encouraged to go to a pastor or an elder or someone for counsel, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have the tools to really provide the type of counsel that you need outside of the biblical aspect of it. So tell us a little bit about what drew you to want to combine the two.
Yeah. I think God was the one that drew me into the two. So I went to seminary and my concentration was in counseling. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was done with seminary, and in seminary, we did all the Bible and theology classes in addition to counseling classes. So it was a setup, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a licensed professional counselor. So I went into the church. I pastored in a couple of churches, and then I became a licensed counselor. But then still, I wasn't sure how am I going to integrate the two, because at times the two can be in competition, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then, maybe 20 years ago, the church was very against,
Right.
like licensed counselors who are doing counseling using theoretical orientations like Sigmund Freud and different people who are pagan, quote unquote,
Right.
so they were somewhat frowned upon, those types of counseling, saying that the word of God is enough. And
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, the counseling world wasn't very sure about the church either. Like, the church spirituality is not enough. And so what God has done with me over the years is that I've been able to integrate the two. So in the work that I do with Elevate Her International, we do trauma work around the world with women. There's been some places we've gone into that breathing techniques are not enough for these women. And so we need a little bit more grounding. And for me, I'm like, okay, let me go back to what I know will ground you when times get hard. We go back to praying, singing, dancing, and worshiping and all of that. And in certain communities around the world, there's so much trauma that just techniques are not enough,
Right.
and we need the word of God. While at the same time, in those spaces, I want to give them the techniques. I want to point them to, when you're walking to the well to fetch for water,
Mm-hmm.
that's activities that you're doing with your body that helps, because God creates your body in such a way that it helps you. So why not teach them how the body functions, how the brain functions, and God is using it and utilizing it in many communities that we go to. We teach them about the brain and how the brain works. I'm like, women in Congo, like we're
Right.
teaching women very simple ways of how the brain works and how we can use those strategies to help, and we don't lose sight of prayer. So
Mm-hmm.
God has taught me, and not just God, but experience too has taught me that they don't have to be in competition.
Right.
There can be a place where integration works. And I know my seminary professor would probably be proud of me, because at that time in seminary, I'm like, I don't know, because they seem to be in competition, but this book is really doing an integration job that we need both. We need Jesus and we need therapy. We
Right.
need the word of God and we need therapy. Like you can't lose sight of either one of them.
Right. And I, I loved it, and in the midst of between the tears, that really stood out to me, that it's like,
That's
wow,
awesome.
this is a really wonderful way to bring the two together, because
Yeah.
there are some times where you just need a technique or a strategy in a moment.
Yeah.
There's other times where you need to make sure that you can get a prayer through. So
Exactly.
sometimes they might be simultaneous.
Exactly.
Breathing while you're saying your prayer.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I do
Yeah.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. So in the first part, where you talk about understanding your trauma story, you do tell a lot of your own personal story. So what was that process like for you to be transparent? Really, you are telling your story and helping the rest of us.
Oh, just like you, I was in tears. Like,
Mm,
I'm talking about things I haven't talked about in a
right.
while. And I'm remembering memories that I've tucked away for so long. I've been functioning with the knowledge that those things happen, but not necessarily, talking about them every day. At some point in the writing process, I had to call my sister. I'm like, did that really happen? Like,
Mm, mhm,
like,
mhm,
please help validate what it is that I experienced. And so it was one of those things that, I'm weeping and writing, and I'm just like,
mhm,
oh my goodness. And so that's why I said this book has already helped me in such a way that that I know it might help my audience. It will help my audience as well. But that writing process was really an interesting process for me because again, I had to go back, and I think that's what it is. When I sit with clients,
mhm.
um, helping them to go back into their own stories, that part takes time.
It does.
It takes a long time. And the reason I'm able to go back, I've done years of counseling. I've
Mhm,
done years of therapy. I've done some measure of the work, that allowed me to be able to go back. Otherwise, it wouldn't work.
mhm.
So that's why I keep calling the book a traveling companion, because it does help you in the process of trying to go back in a gentle way, not in a forceful way, but yeah, going back is not easy. And that's why a lot of people too, they stay away from therapy because they're afraid of going back.
Absolutely. They're afraid of going back.
They're afraid of confronting. Yeah.
Definitely so. So you start out with born into trauma. Now, of course, you have a very specific story, life story that, talks about that being, your family being from Haiti and the experiences of your family. So you could talk a little bit about that, but then also how many of us may be born into trauma just because of the circumstances of our birth or things that are happening within our families.
Yeah. The funny thing is, there's a lot of stories we tell in our families that are
Hmm.
trauma stories, and we laugh about them, not realizing that it is a trauma story, and we tell a lot of those stories. And so for me, that was the case, the story of my birth and the story of, even my name, how it came to be, the story of my parents not being in Haiti with us. All of those were trauma stories,
Hmm.
and I didn't know, I didn't know. We just kind of made light of it, like, oh yeah, that's what happens, those things kind of happen. And so for me, I did not know that those were trauma stories until I became, a therapist and a pastor myself, or even a trauma informed therapist, where I started to go back to look at how the stories were told and what was surrounding the stories. And I think that's the thing, starting to ask questions about those stories, like, wait a minute, so father was over there, and mom was over here, and this was happening. So putting the pieces together and asking questions, then you start realizing that those stories that's been told, that are great stories that we tell over and over again at Thanksgiving and Christmas, those are trauma stories. And we need to know that. We need to bring that up to the surface, right? And then we need to ask the question, well, what do we do with the trauma stories that we often tell in families? How do we readjust? Because those are stories that we often tell, in families. And so what do we do with that? So that was the case for me. I was born in it, and you can't be from Haiti and not necessarily, or for the majority of us, to not have a trauma story in our childhood. you know Many of us have these trauma stories in our childhood, like that was the case for me.
But also, and this speaks to the name of the book, Does God See Me? Finding the God that sees you. I mean, you get to that right in chapter 2. So when you say, Does God see me? Number one, why did you choose this title, and how did that concept come to you from using the Bible as your jumping off point for that?
Yeah, the title of the book was quite interesting, because the first title I had, or the working title, when you're writing a book, you have the working title, and the working title I have is The God That Sees Me, right? And so after completing a good portion of the book, my editor said, "Hey, we need to relook at the title, because it's kind of been done and it's overdone, and so on and so forth." Um, and then there was a tension in Hagar's story, in my story, that we often won't name.
Mm-hmm.
And so after going back and forth with my editor, I called some of my friends. I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of this title. Is
Mm-hmm.
it too controversial? you know, does
Mm-hmm.
God see me? Because that's a tension point
It is.
in every trauma stories, or anyone that's dealt with trauma. That's a tension point there, that causes everyone to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
Does God care? Does God see me? Does God see what I'm going through? Why God doesn't do something?
Right.
Is there a God? Because if there is a God, why am I suffering so much?
Mm-hmm.
And so I sent the book title to a friend, and she said, "That's the tension right there I
Mm-hmm.
have with God on a regular basis." And
Mm-hmm.
I knew this had to be the title of the book, because it's the tension point that many of us deal with, even in the church, but we won't
Right.
name it. So the title of
Mm-hmm.
the book, so I went back to Hagar, reading the story, because a good portion of the book, there's the story of Hagar, my story, and otherwise. I went back to the story Hagar, and I'm like, well, what would have caused Hagar to say, "You are the God that sees me"? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
she must have wondered, does God see me? She must have
Mm-hmm.
even asked the question, does God care? Is there even a God? Because for her to exclaim, for her to proclaim, for her to be so shocked, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
imagining Hagar being so shocked, like, "Oh, you are the God that sees me. You see me."
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
there had to be a moment where she was wondering, is there a God? Does that God see me? you know?
Mhm.
So I went back to Hagar and she gave me this question. She was like, that's one of the questions I asked God. Does God see me?
Mhm.
In order for her to go back in Genesis 16 and says, you are El Roy, you are the God that sees me. So
Mhm.
that it took me some time to come up with that title. And again, I'm like, well, can you have a question as a title? You know, I'm like, well, it is my book, and I'm like,
Right?
there's been some questions, and so I thought this would be not just a provocative question, but to elevate and bring the question to the surface. That's
Mhm.
the question. A lot of people, when they read the title of the book, they're like, you just asked the question.
Right.
And it's the question for a lot of us.
It is. It is. Now, briefly, for those who may not know the story of Hagar, what's going on with her that would have prompted her to ask this question?
Yeah. So the story of Hagar is found in Genesis 16. Hagar is said to be a slave. She's an Egyptian slave. And Egypt is Africa, people. And that means Hagar was a woman of color, you
Mhm.
know? And so it's always important to say that because sometimes we neutralize
Right.
these women of color, black women in the Bible. And so Hagar, you know, she's a slave and she's inside of the story of Sarah and Abraham found in Genesis. And Abraham and Sarah, God made a promise to them that they would have descendants more numerous than the stars in the sky. And so
Mhm.
they couldn't have children. How are they going to have, you know, stars more, the descendants more numerous than the stars in the sky? And so there, when they couldn't have children, Hagar was the slave and she became somewhat of a surrogate.
Mhm.
The child that she would bear is the child that would now be Abraham and Sarah's child. Now,
Mhm.
what happened is that at the time when she became pregnant, and so and we have to really insert some things in the scripture that isn't there. We have to think humanly about
Right.
Hagar. Hagar was not superhuman. She was not like she didn't have like magical powers or anything
Right.
to withstand all stuff. So we have to understand a couple of things. Hagar was basically a breeder. She was abused, sexually abused because she did not have the autonomy to say yes or no. And Hagar, when she became pregnant, you know, the scripture said she became indignant. Now, we
Mhm.
don't know, you know, a lot of people believe that, you know, Hagar deserved the whipping and the lashing that she received by the hands of Sarah because she talked back to Sarah. She became indignant, or she was she poked fun at Sarah, whatever the case
Mhm.
may be. There are different commentaries I've read that says, well, when have you ever heard a slave to be happy with their slave masters? Of course
Right.
she's indignant, you know. Of course she felt some kind of way, right? Of course
Mhm.
she had to. And so what happened with Hagar, with all the mistreatment and all the lashing and all the beating, and while she's pregnant, by the way, I
Right.
think we forget that. You know,
Right.
she's getting beat and she's getting mistreated while she's pregnant. And she figures the only way I can save my life and save the baby's life that's inside of me is by running.
Mhm.
And so she ran. And while she was running, that's where she met God. So Hagar had every reason to ask the question, does God see me? Like, they
Mhm.
take me as a slave from my country, from my land. They bring me here to be a breeder. Now I'm pregnant with this child. Now I'm getting, you know, beat and lashing. I would have asked the same question. Is there a God? And does that God see me? I think of the enslaved. You
Right.
know, I believe they ask the same question. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of people in Haiti right now. I believe they're asking this question. People in Palestine, people in Congo. I believe that's the question that's being asked in the middle of pain and suffering. When there's pain and suffering, we got some questions for God. We do.
Absolutely. And, and in all of that, in my reading and just in hearing you, retell the story, it's that, yeah, we oftentimes feel that way. Like, there was, they say, why has God forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? Oftentimes we feel that. And you're right. There is that tension in you choosing that, because we're often taught to believe that you don't question God.
Right.
you know
Right.
and but oftentimes we do. All of us have at some point in time, whether we want to admit it, in public or not. It's just true
Exactly.
when we see things that are happening in our lives. So I really could appreciate you, kind of giving us a biblical example. And of course, throughout the Bible there are others,
There are.
as well, but this is kind of like the basis for the book, so thank you for that.
Yeah, you're
um,
welcome.
and in this particular section, you talk also about some of the impacts of trauma and how things impact us, over time. But what I love is in the fourth chapter of this section, you talk about, do you want to get well? Because
Mm,
that's a thing. I think that sometimes people may not want to get well because
yeah.
they don't, because in order to get well, you got to do what I did earlier, with read stuff and cry.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to question God. You have to sometimes question yourself. You have to question the people that may have been in your life when these things were going on. So sometimes it's just
Yeah.
to put up a wall and block all that stuff, versus
Yeah.
really, do you really want to get well?
Right. 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 I had to go there with that question because I think trauma is so can be such a mechanism that keeps you trapped.
Mhm.
It can keep you trapped in your head, in your body, um, how you think, how you feel, where you go, what you do. For people who are dealing with PTSD, trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma, things that continue to happen, it can keep you trapped. It can take a hold of your brain, you know, and keep you in these cycles where you can't make any forward movement.
Right.
And so there is a part of the healing journey that's all you know, that you have to be at a place where you're tired.
Mm.
You're tired of being in the same cycles and you're tired of feeling the same. And you have to get to a place of whether you run or whatever the case may be, like Hagar, like, I can't die here.
Mhm.
There has to be a determining place where you get to in your healing journey where you say, this can't be the end.
Mhm.
This can't be the end of my story. And I want to get well. And I think God is so gracious. God
Yeah.
is so loving that God does not force it on us. God does not force healing on us because I believe God does understand, even for the people who are stuck. I believe God understands that area of stuckness and God sits with us, and God waits with us until we're ready. And what God does, though, I believe God gives opportunities, offers opportunities
Mhm.
everywhere, like
Absolutely.
signs everywhere for
Mhm.
healing to take place, you
Mhm.
know? Um, and I believe when you are ready and you're able to take that opportunity and take hold of that opportunity, I think that's where you can feel the overflow of the spirit just moving and you're just ready.
Mhm.
Can nobody hold you back when you're at that place of saying, yes, God, let's go.
Mhm.
So I think God asks us this question often: do you want to get well? It
Mhm.
will be painful, it will be hard, it will be challenging, but can I show you how to get well and what to do to get well? So I think there's a part that's all us. There's
Right.
a part of the healing journey that we have to kind of surrender to, that we have to show up for. There's a part of the healing journey that we have to take hold of, and
Right.
that's our part.
Hmm. Oh, yes, we have. Yes, so trauma can paralyze us. Absolutely. Absolutely. Where we don't move. And I mean, a lot of times, there's this whole thing of surviving versus thriving.
Right.
Many of us are just in survival mode.
Forever. Yeah,
For,
forever. The thing is, I tell my clients this: it's important for you to survive the
right.
trauma. You got to live through it. You have to live through it. You can't die. And so survival is to make sure that you don't die, you know? Like your siblings die, your husband dies, you have multiple losses, you've been through abuses, you've been through all of that. Survive it.
Hmm.
Don't die there. But once you survive, there has to be, now you can start making way to living a little bit more abundantly, a
Hmm.
little bit more than just surviving one thing after another. And I think it goes in cycles
Oh, yeah,
too,
absolutely.
it goes in cycles as well. So there is a place for survival. Um, and then I'm also mindful of people who are dealing with systemic issues,
Right.
where there is no choice but survival,
Right. That's
on
very
a regular basis. So I'm always sensitive to that, because I've worked with those women in Congo and Haiti, who are daily surviving. They're
true.
daily trying to just stay alive, so I'm mindful of those people as well.
And that's also one of the things that I really love about the book is that you have many perspectives, because you can talk about it from, being, coming from an immigrant family, being from Haiti. You can talk about it from the perspective of being in the United States, for the vast majority of your life outside of, your formative years, but then also being able to go to Haiti, to go to the Congo, to go to these other places, and to see that in a lot of ways we're more alike than we are not alike, just in the ways that
Absolutely.
we function. And circumstances might be different, but we're dealing with the same types of issues.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Everywhere that I go and I meet these women, women are just energetic. Women have this energy to survive, to preserve life, to protect life. And so everywhere I go, I see this energy, even in prison.
Mm.
I will see these women in prison. Like, we have this jovial spirit if we allow it to come out. Like, we'll go in, Congo, Uganda, or Haiti, and the minute, I'll say something, I'll make a joke or something, because trauma healing does not have to be tears all the time. There's times for joy and laughter as well, so I'll have them put down the books or whatever, and we'll crack a joke, or we'll laugh, or we'll dance, and I'll tell them to twirl around, or we're dancing, hugging each other, high-fiving each other. Everywhere I go, same thing. We respond the same way. We laugh, we have joy, we have fun. We look out for each other, we support one another. And so I'm convinced that if the sisterhood can be healed, can if the sisterhood can be liberated, how beautiful that would be, as we're liberating other women. And that's what we do. That's what we're good at doing.
Absolutely. The whole thing of it being, and I'm jumping around a little bit, maybe jumping ahead a little, but the fact
No,
that
it's okay. It's
it's
okay.
a communal thing. It's a communal thing. I mean, yes, there are things that we can do on our own, and there are exercises in the book where, we're answering, personal questions, where we're journaling, where we're learning how to, stand and ground ourselves, or, maybe take a walk or move. So I do love that as well, because it's a holistic, you're providing holistic answers, and
Right.
tools for us in that. But even in the solitary work we do, there is that space for healing and community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no healing without community, in my opinion. We need the sisterhood. We need the brotherhood. We need the family. We need one another to remind us of who we are, like remind us of our humanity. The minute we show up in these spaces, it's almost like they're happy, because one of the things they will share is that you didn't forget us.
Right.
You remembered me. Um, so when we are able to see each other, it's almost like a testament that we're
Mhm.
still here, we're still alive, and that people care, and that we still have purpose, and there's still work for us to do. So the community is does that. It reminds us of our purpose, and why we need to continue on that healing journey. The community encourages us to keep
Right.
going. It
Mhm.
really does. And so our healing is interconnected with the community.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, in the second part of the book, you do talk about facing your trauma story, and for everyone, just to be aware because you're going to buy this book, you're going to pre-order, right?
Yes.
When you read it, just to be aware that there may be some things in that part of the book that might be a little triggering for people, just because it talks about things like domestic violence and sexual abuse and things like that. So, but just today, I want to talk a little bit about grief and shame, because those are parts of our trauma story. Many times those are things, even if you've never been through domestic violence, substance abuse, at some point you felt grief, at some point you've probably felt some level of shame.
Yeah.
So just talk a little bit about those things and why
Yeah.
you wanted to include those in this book as well.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about shame because we're constantly dealing with shame, because the story that shame tells us is that we're not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is that we've been through, whatever it is that's happened to us, shame continually tell us we're not enough, and
Mm-hmm.
we didn't do enough, we didn't measure up, we did this wrong, or we went to this place we shouldn't have, and we went there, or we didn't follow the proper rules and decorum, and so on and so forth. I mean, a bajillion ways that shame, and sometimes shame uses the church, the culture, other people around us, that continues to remind us that we're not enough,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not from God. And so what happens with shame, though, to overcome shame, you have to bring shame to the light. you
Right.
know there's something that I do with my girlfriends. Lately we have this group chat, and we just tell on ourselves, like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't feel good, we feel depressed, we feel we have imposter syndrome, we have all these things that's happening, because shame can't thrive in these spaces where you're just calling. It's almost like confession, and that's
Right.
another reason why you need the community to heal, because in the situation of shame, you're confessing to your friends, you're confessing to different people before shame gets in front of it and says, oh, you're feeling depressed, or how shameful. You
Mhm.
should be happy, you should be joyful, you should not be feeling depressed. That's why a lot of people stay away from counseling, and
Mhm.
don't get help for mental illness, because of shame.
Right.
There's shame even in the healing journey. That's the thing that's
Right.
mind boggling. Even to get help and heal, there's shame in that, because
Mm,
the shame is saying that, what's wrong with you? Why
right.
aren't you well? Why aren't you good? Why aren't you perfect? And so
Mm-hmm.
the person that says, I want to get help, I want to go get counseling, my marriage is not going well, I want to go to counseling. Shame says you should be perfect. So for me, I
Right.
had to bring it to the surface because I know
Mhm.
it's such a pervasive thing that we deal with in the midst of trauma, in the midst of pain and suffering. Shame is there. The second thing is grief. Like, when you're dealing with loss, pain, suffering, grief, I mean, we grieve so many things,
Right.
not just the person that's passed, but we grieve locations, we grieve homes, we grieve how things should be. We
Right.
grieve we grieve a number of things. And I wanted to have a chapter on grief alone because the whole journey of trauma healing is almost like surrounded by grief. There's grief everywhere, there's
Right.
sadness everywhere, there's loss everywhere. And so
Mhm.
when we're talking about things like domestic violence and things like that,
Right.
there's grief in that. There's so much pain and so much grief and so much shame. So those two subjects, I really wanted to bring them out to the surface so that we can really have a conversation and really start healing from those tenets. Grief, however, is a little different from shame because grief is a journey you go on.
Right. And
Grief
it's
is just, yeah,
waves.
it's waves. It's
Mm,
waves. And sometimes I say just surrender to it. Give it the moment that it needs. Give it
mm,
the space that it needs. Sometimes it just needs the one little moment to remember, and then
mhm,
it moves to the next wave. This past weekend, my oldest nephew got married, and my brother passed 4 years ago, and they were very close. And
okay.
so at the wedding, I know every time we meet nowadays, it's since he's passed, there's this grief, this joy and sadness at the same time. So at the wedding, they asked me to pray, and I just had to give a little moment of silence.
Mhm,
Sometimes grief just needs a moment of silence to say, I
mhm.
remember. I
Right.
remember someone who was supposed to be here and who's not here. And then
Mm,
we keep it moving. But we don't know how to integrate grief in our life because we think grief should start and end at a particular time. And that's
mhm.
not how grief works.
It absolutely does not, because
Mm,
as I was reading that and thinking about the loss of my father 6 years
mhm,
ago, it comes in waves.
mhm.
There are times when it's really strong and on me, and other times where I'm good. But just
Yeah.
what you said, like the person that should be here, because those who've watched before already kind of know this. But if you haven't watched this show before, my father was the one who gave me the love of reading. So I
Wow.
know if he was here, he would be
Wow.
watching these shows, he would be reading the books, we would be having conversations about it.
Wow.
I know that he would be very, very proud to see me in this space doing this thing. Because a matter of fact, now that we're talking about it, like probably less than 2 weeks before he passed, I had sent him a book by his favorite writer, who's Walter Mosley.
Wow.
I remember, us talking about the book and stuff like that, and then he wound up passing away. And I asked my stepmother, it's like, did Daddy finish that book before he passed? She's like, he did.
Wow.
So it's like, it was up, I mean, really to the end, that was something that we shared. So I
Yeah.
know right now, even though I'll admit I can't read a Walter Mosley book for that reason, but maybe one day, not yet.
One day, now one day, give yourself
Yeah.
time. That's
But
okay.
yeah, but things like that, it's like,
Yeah,
it comes and it goes, and it's in waves. So I really
absolutely.
appreciate you talking about that. And I'm gonna just tell you right now, we're gonna go a few minutes over. 'Cause
Yes,
we
yes,
still got a whole section to talk about, and technically it's 10 minutes, so we might go over by a few minutes if that's okay with you.
yes.
But one of the other things, now of course we talk. You also talk about racial trauma in the book, which we all are familiar with that, just as being black, indigenous, brown, whatever in the
Yes.
United States and around the world, the ways that shows up. But the other thing that got me when I was talking about them tears, abandonment,
Whew.
and how many of us are dealing with abandonment in one shape, form, or fashion.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Whew. Yeah, that part got me too.
Mm,
Um, Abandonment is probably one of the hardest um things to recognize that you're dealing with, and to accept that you were, whether it be physically abandoned or emotionally abandoned, partly because, you know um in my case, I had parents who cared and who loved me and all of that. They provided for me. um but there, it doesn't negate the fact that there I was still abandoned, you know.
mm,
And it's hard to talk about these things because um we have loyalty to our families. We have these strong loyalties to our families, that if we talk about abandonment, then all of the sudden, the parents they will feel bad, and they'll share that they did the best that they could, and this and that. All that is true, but it's the other thing is true too, that there was abandonment, that emotionally we were abandoned and physically we were abandoned. um and it took me years to come to terms to even be able to say that
mm-hmm,
without feeling like I was disappointing my parents and I was letting them down and I was sharing a dirty family secret. you know so it took me some time to be able to admit that.
mm-hmm. And the thing about that is, like you said, I think of many people probably dealt with that, and I'm not even necessarily, like you said, it's not even necessarily always the fact that a person isn't there. Sometimes it could be the ways in which they are there. And you talk a lot about how we as children form our styles of attachment based upon how the people are in our lives who are bringing us up.
Right, right. Yeah, a lot of cultures, children are seen and not heard. And so the different types of attachments that we experience in our families of origin will set us up for how we deal with relationships, right? And so I talk about the four different types of attachment: secure attachment, disorganized attachment, and so on and so forth. I have a tickle in my throat.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
And so I do talk about that to go a little deeper, um to give us just a little bit more information about how to deal with attachment, how to identify it, and how to move forward with secure attachment, because secure attachment is what we want, is what we
Mhm.
desire, is what we need, and is what we can still move towards that, but we have to know what abandonment is, what it does, and where it went wrong, what you needed as a child, and what you still need as an adult. Because sometimes we, even as an adult, we don't know what we need. We don't
Right.
know what was missing. We don't know that, I wanted my mother to love me or hug me or say, I'm proud of you, or show up for you, and so on and so forth. So we go around. One of the things that happens to me is that, the hyper independence,
Mhm.
when we just don't want anyone's help. We can do it ourselves, and so on and so forth. Just the other day I heard someone saying, I was 4 years old, and my parents said I wanted to do everything on my own, so she let me. I'm like, but you were 4.
Four, right?
You were 4. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a whole lot of needs that a 4-year-old has that a
Mm-hmm.
parent can still meet that 4-year-old. So it's things like that where, you know, we have to pay attention to our hyper independence, you know, that need to not need anyone, that need to not have anyone around us, that need to just take care of ourselves, that need with to, you know, I can do bad all by myself, you know. It is so hard for us to admit that we
Right.
need others around us. So abandonment will show up in our relationship, or signs of abandonment, or signs of insecure attachment will show up in our relationships. Our relationships are usually the first indicators to help us see that there are some issues with abandonment,
Mm-hmm.
fears of abandonment. So, or our lack of relationships, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
believe we were created for relationships, for
Right.
community. So if we're completely recluse and completely to ourselves and with no friends, no nothing, for me as a therapist, I'm like, what's happened there? You know,
Right.
what's went on over here? So
Right. And that's what kind of, because, yeah, let's say, physician heal thyself. When,
yes, yes,
when I was reading that, I was just like, ooh, wee. I could see myself in that. It's the whole thing of, not wanting to get attached, maybe
hmm,
choosing unhealthy attachments because you figure, like, well, I didn't have great expectations anyway. You
yes,
knew it was unhealthy when you went into it. And
right,
then when that person proves you right, you're like, well, but not
right,
understanding that, oh, that's coming from something else.
right.
Somewhere in life, there was a space, and I'm saying I, but myself and others might have felt like you couldn't trust that
Right.
it's going to be what you thought it was. So then you kind of look for it, and then that way, it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Well,
yeah.
it's familiar. It's familiar. I think
Yes.
we don't give credit to what feels familiar and what we know, good or bad, because sometimes we go gravitate towards those relationships that is reminiscent of what we went through, what we saw, the energy that kind of speaks the language of our hearts, unless you get healing so you
Mm,
can identify that this was a trauma bond. This was a trauma story that you were told. Like, yes, it reminds you of your childhood, but that story is filled with trauma. Like,
mm,
let's go back so that we can kind of pull it apart and then put it together again a healthier way so that the next time you're looking for friends and intimate partners, you can identify the pieces that were traumatic and connect it with this relationship. You see what I mean? So it's
mm,
important to be able um to to look at the trauma, the pain and suffering in the stories, even if our parents and our families told us this, funny little anecdotal story
mm,
of childhood, you got to pull it apart because it's set you up for the relationships that you have today, good or bad. And a lot of people are like, well, why am I continuing to, choose these relationships? We have to go back and see the why.
Thank you. That's good. That's good. It was worth taking a couple extra minutes to make sure we did.
Yes, yes.
But in the final part of the book, it's all about finding freedom from your trauma story, because
Mm,
it's something that and people who are close to me who know about, different conversations that we might have about other people that are close to me. I'll be like, oh man, I'll be so glad when they stop telling that same story.
yeah, right, right, right,
But of course, they have to do I might be ready for them to do that, but they have
right.
to do the work themselves. And because freedom is the thing, so in that last section you do talk about actually vocalizing and telling the story, and then like lamenting the story, and
Yeah.
that's kind of where you start. Just a little bit about what that does for us when we can tell it and then lament it.
Yeah. When you get to a place of being able to tell the story, it's both a scary place, and at the same time can be a liberating place, right?
Mm,
And I have lots of caution in this chapter.
right,
I'm like, okay,
right,
be careful, be careful, be careful,
right.
choose
Safe
wisely.
spaces, safe spaces.
Safe spaces, safe spaces, because it's important to not be re-traumatized depending on who you tell your story to. So you have to be very discerning. And the problem is sometimes when you're dealing with trauma brain, you don't know what spaces are safe and
Mm,
what spaces are unsafe. So you go and tell your story anywhere, and then people don't handle you well, and then it
right.
re-traumatizes you. It's like, oh, I'm so, my heart breaks for this sister, because sometimes you'll watch some reality show and you're like,
Mhm.
don't, why are you doing this?
Yeah, like not them,
Not
wrong people, danger,
them.
danger.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I do as, a therapist. I'm like, oh no, this is gonna end up in disastrously. And so it's really important. I do think being able to get to the point of telling your story to either a therapist or safe people, there can be power in that. There can be such great power in that, but you have to be very careful in doing that, you
Mm,
know, and I'm and being at a place of lamenting your story, lamenting aspects of your story. I mean, I've cried for the childhood me. I've
mhm.
cried for the young adult me. It's important to be able to see it, to lament it. Because I
Mm,
think that's part of the healing process,
right,
to
right.
be able to show up for your story, to be able to look at it and to be able to lament it and cry and just reconcile and do all those things. That's where the healing is happening. It's like the
Mhm,
links are starting to form. It's like clink, 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 clink,
mhm.
and you start to get stronger and stronger. So it's important that part of the book. I really wanted to make sure it was there to give a blueprint, to give a format, or something to help people be able to start being able to tell their stories and lament the story.
Right, right. Because and one of the other books that we've read in this space, it was something to the effect of sometimes you have to grieve or lament what you thought should have been and what you've experienced, and
Exactly.
recognizes as what it is, and then begin the healing process of moving forward. But in that healing process and moving forward, it requires forgiveness, oftentimes of others, but then
Yeah,
also yourself.
exactly. Notice forgiveness is towards the end.
It is.
Uh-huh. And that was on purpose,
Right. I'm not gonna.
Yes, because a lot of times forgiveness is a thing that's yielded over people,
Mhm.
in the
Especially in
church or
church.
in
Yep.
different places. Like, you have to forgive now. I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. Forgiveness should not even be in the conversation just yet.
Right.
When a person has gone through trauma, when a person has gone through pain or suffering, or whatever the case may be, domestic violence, like, that's third level.
Right. Right.
It's level 3. Let's wait, let's do the healing, let's talk about the trauma, let's do all the things about the trauma that you need to do. Let's lament it, let's grieve it, let's talk about shame, let's do all the things in the part 1 and 2 first,
Right.
before we can get to part 3 and talk about forgiveness. And that was on purpose.
Hmm.
I don't think there's a way around forgiveness, for me as a Christian, I have looked all through and through, um, and I have not seen a way around forgiveness in the healing journey. So, forgiveness is something that I believe does something for us. I think, too, because I put it on level three, by the time you get to level three or part three, you're ready.
That's
You're
true.
ready to let go,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why it can't be in part one. It
Mm-hmm.
can't be the first question to talk about. It can't be the first thing you tell a person. Well, it happened a long time ago. Let it go. You
Mm.
know, that's not how it works. They
Right.
let it go when they're able to talk about it. They let it
Right.
go when they're able to receive listeners to listen, when people validate their stories.
Mm.
They let it go in those situations and circumstances.
Right.
By the time you get to level three, you're ready to forgive, and it's not something that you have to be forced to do. It's not something that the church says, if you don't forgive, God won't forgive you. I don't think that's how it works.
Right.
So by the time you get to part three, you're ready. You're like, i'm
Mhm.
i'm done with this. I'm tired. I'm sick and
Mhm.
tired of being sick and tired, so I'm ready.
Right. And understanding that, the forgiveness of others does not necessarily mean you have to get back into relationship with
It
them.
doesn't. It doesn't. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's the other issue we have with forgiveness, because we equate forgiveness to reconciliation. And
Mhm.
that is not true at all. At all. I don't know who's hearing me tonight. Forgiveness does not equate reconciliation.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to forgive while living separately.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can forgive and be divorced.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can forgive and just decide not to continue with the relationship.
Mhm.
So forgiveness does not equate to reconciliation. Not
Absolutely.
always. Sometimes it does, but not
Sometimes, yeah.
always.
Not always. And I've touched on it briefly, forgiving yourself, because sometimes we hold on to that shame, that blame, that whatever in certain circumstances, things that may have happened to us that maybe we feel like, oh, if I would have only done this, or if I wouldn't have done that, maybe that wouldn't have happened. And we have to learn
Yeah.
to forgive ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That part is so important, releasing yourself, because the more you hold on to it, the more it doesn't allow you to go forward and flourish and
Mm-hmm.
start anew, and do things differently. But the more you hold on to whatever it is that you did, whatever relationship, unhealthy relationship you got into, I'm like, girl, it's time to let it go.
Right.
You're human. You made the mistake. Confess it. Make amends and keep it moving.
Keep it.
Keep it moving. So it's important for us to be able to learn how from our mistakes, and learn how to confess it and let it go.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go. I just have to bring this up real quick, because we're talking about 1, 2, 3 steps. That's one of the things that I often find difficult. Like, say I'm thinking of what happened in Charleston. We're
Mm.
going 5 minutes later, we forgive him. I'm like, 5 minutes
Right.
later. I mean, I'm being facetious, but it was just really
Exactly.
fast, and I'm like, are
Mm-hmm.
we doing that because our Christianity, our churches tell us that we need to do that? Because you haven't
Right.
worked through anything at that point. To me,
Right.
at that point, it's just words.
Exactly, exactly. And oftentimes it is. And then we have to really be careful, especially if we're asking people to be in relationship with one another. And then we do this quick forgiveness, and they haven't confessed what they did wrong. They haven't repented. They haven't made amends. They have not made reparations. They have not changed anything. You want me to be in relationship with them, but they haven't changed anything.
Right.
How does that work?
Right.
So that doesn't work. It creates more harm than good. It creates more tension, more distrust, and more hypervigilance, feelings of hypervigilance. So it's important, if we're asking people, like people in the church or people in a corporation, to be in relationship with one another, and something happened and then you forgive the next day and there's no change, that's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
That's really a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you.
there has to be some change, some
There has to be
reparation, some
some time for some
mhm,
healing
or some
to occur.
healing.
True healing to occur. And
Yes,
last but not least, you talk about rediscovering hope and embracing joy, because there is joy. Joy is
yes,
available.
yes, yes.
Yes.
Those were my favorite chapters to write.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I believe if we lose sight of hope, that's when we lose it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hope is that glue that continues to bind us and help us to continue to move onward.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever pain or suffering or trauma that you've been through, even if you have a little mustard seed
Yes.
of hope, that will carry you through the healing journey. We can't lose sight of hope. We
Right.
can't lose sight of hope. For many people around the world that I've worked with, oftentimes when they talk about their pain, like the women in Haiti, they're like, we have no choice but to hold on to hope,
Mm-hmm.
because they know if they lose sight of hope, they lose everything.
Right.
They lose everything. So I had to write the chapter on hope. I had to write the chapter on joy, because let
Yes.
me tell you, even in the darkest hours, you will see a glimmer of joy. And I tell my clients, and I'm telling you all, to hold on to that glimmer of joy.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear it in the baby crying. You can see it in an elderly couple walking. You can see it in the sun, in the flowers, in the, springing. And you can see it, and you have to hold on to that joy, because that's the recipe to keep moving forward.
Right.
Otherwise, we lose it all,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't lose it all. We
Yeah.
need we need to preserve this life of ours, because I keep thinking about the enslaved and
Mm-hmm.
my ancestors, and how they were able to be resilient. They were able to hold on so that I can be the recipient of their joy and their hope, right? And so we can't lose sight of hope. We can't lose sight of joy. Yeah.
You have a comment. Thank you so much. If people don't change after you forgive them, let them go, because they are no longer your business, but pray for them.
Right. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that there is definitely truth in that.
There
Well,
is
thank
truth in
you.
that.
I appreciate you so much, and that's why I had to take a
Mhm.
few extra minutes of your time.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. This was good.
Sister Jerla, I had to do that because this
Yeah.
book is good and it's not out yet. So tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about, the release date. Do you have any events? I've seen some things on your IG page, but what
Yes.
events people might be able to come and meet you in person and get their book signed, and
Yes.
other, virtual events like this.
Yes, so I am in New Jersey. So our official launch will be in New Jersey. I have a copy here as well. Official launch will be in New Jersey. So our first event will be in South Orange. I'm working on some other events. I'll be in Philly in June. In July, I'll be in Houston. I'll be in Arkansas in May as well. So there's different events. I'll post them on social media. That way, different people can know where to meet me. And if you have a community that you want to invite me to, I will travel and come. and be a part of you guys' events. So if you're watching and you have an idea for the book and for me to sign some books and talk about the book, and I'm all here. Just send me a message. I would love to do that.
That sounds good. And for those who have not pre-ordered yet, I told y'all to put it in the cart. If you didn't do that,
Yes,
you can
please
go to
pre-order.
Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is just that, browngirlcollectivebookstore.com. It'll take you to Bookshop, and you can find the book there. Go ahead and pre-order. If you pre-order, of course, you may even get it on the day that it comes out, just depending
Yes,
on that
yes.
process. But I really do want everyone, what I said, within the sound of my voice. I want
I love it, Marcie.
everybody. Oh, I didn't tell you this, but I went to seminary for a while too. That's another conversation for
Oh,
that.
we need to have a conversation
We
about that,
can talk
Marcie.
about that. But yes, everybody just grab a copy of this book, at your favorite retailer, wherever that may be. Hopefully, Brown Girl Collective Bookstore can become one of your favorite retailers, because that does help to support the work that goes on here. But yes, please go ahead and do that, because there is something in here for everybody. Because I
Yeah,
think sometimes, even the word trauma can be traumatic for people. You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just the word itself,
Yeah,
especially when you see so many things that might be trauma porn, so to speak.
right.
But this is a book that actually helps us navigate through that and to get to the healing side.
Yes,
So it's
yes,
something that's good for us as individuals, groups that we're in, whatever the case may be, to work
yes,
through that and work with wonderful people like our special guest to help you navigate
yes,
the process as well. Because there are things that we can do on our own. There are things we can do using books, and you even say that in the book, but there's some things you actually need to go and sit and talk with somebody.
yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much again. So I am gonna,
Thank you.
you stay here with me for just 2 seconds, but
Okay.
everybody else, I want to wish you a good night. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving both of us grace to talk to you a few extra minutes, because this was such an important conversation.
Yes,
We look forward to seeing you again here real soon. Next week, as a matter of fact, we'll be here next week, and I will announce that book probably tomorrow, so you can see who's going to be here next week. So thanks again to everyone, and we will see you. Oh, somebody said they're pre-ordering. Yes. Are you accepting clients?
oh wow. Yes, if you're in New Jersey or Texas, because
Okay,
that's where
let's
I'm
pull
licensed.
your arm, Monica. But
I'm taking some coaching clients as well. So yes, and I can do that. So email me.
okay, and I'm gonna put the other stuff back up. So yeah, if you go to, especially on IG, there is the like the link where you can go and get more information through that link, where everything that Jarla has is there, or you can go to the website and reach out to her directly there. So thank you. So all right, get some clients out of this. I love it.
Yes,
I love
yes,
it. I
yes.
love it.
That sounds great.
All right. So thank you again to everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Take good care and have a great night, morning or afternoon, depending on what time
Yes.
you're watching. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.